time to stop on it. All right, guys, we'll get started. Today, we're going to be having our team meeting. We're going to get into an educational piece and get some updates on a few different things as well. So I'll get started going through some of the normal stuff that we talk about when we get together, which is our mission at KW to build careers worth having, businesses worth owning, lives worth living, and experiences worth giving, and legacies worth leaving. And our vision is to be the real estate company of choice for agents and their customers or clients. This one's really important. I was talking to someone just this morning about how important this is, and we see it everywhere. And it really does show up. It's part of our culture, which is God, family, and then business, and in that order. And that's done specifically and strategically, which is really important to understand too. And then our Y4C2Ts. And at the end of the day, we are a technology company that provides a real estate platform for our agents, buyers, and the sellers as well. And what a perfect segue. I'm going to invite. So this is a thing that is a company and a platform that does business on the mainland. I don't know that they've done anything yet in Hawaii. But I got a chance to meet them on a couple of opportunities on Zoom, as well as the leadership conference that we were at. It's basically, and I'm not going to speak too much for him, but I'll invite Aaron to come off of mute and talk about EARNNEST. But EARNNEST is kind of like Venmo for real estate. And the beauty of it is, and why it was attractive to me and why it stood out to me was there is a lot of fraud that takes place in this process, typically, which is picking up a check. There's obviously some labor involved in driving back and forth. Wire transfers, believe it or not, there's fraud that happens and occurs in a wire transfer. And EARNNEST has done, 120,000 plus transactions, none of which have ever experienced any type of fraud whatsoever. And it's super, super simple and easy. It doesn't cost the realtor anything. It doesn't cost escrow anything. It's just a fee that is, I think it's $15, and it's less than what they would normally have to pay for a wire transfer to begin with. So, Aaron, if you're available, Aaron is from EARNNEST. If you can come off of mute and talk a little bit about your company.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chad. I appreciate it. Had a great time meeting you last week and being with other leaders there at Keller Williams. It was an exciting time. But we are EARNNEST, and we are available to you today, which is fun to say. We do have some title companies already on board with us in your area. So it's something you can get into our tool, search out those title companies, and literally send requests digitally to receive that EARNNEST money. But until I don't know if I can share yet. I can't. So I'll just work on this platform here on the screen. So EARNNEST.
I have your other slides if you want me to change. Do you want me to go to this one?
Go ahead and go back to that first one.
Okay.
I'll go ahead and start with that. So our website is a great place to start, y'all. I'm coming to you from South Carolina, so that's why I'm using the Southern slang here. So y'all is part of my dialect. But earnest.com, it's not spelled incorrectly there. It's got two N's there. So make sure you put in EARNNEST with two N's. And you can find a lot of great resources here. Notice the products tab there. You'll scroll down there to our apps page, and that's where you're going to be able to download our phone app. I highly recommend you jump right in there. It'll be accessible on Android or iPhone, to download it to where you need it. And that is our most powerful application. We have multiple ways for you to use us. Our phone app is definitely made for you as an agent on the go, which is really exciting. It's our bread and butter. We've won awards with it. And what it does is when you send a request through our platform, the phone app allows you to track that request. You can see exactly where your buyer is in process, and it allows you to literally see when they click on it, when they connect their identity and their bank account, and then when they actually hit the paid button, then all the way through to deposited. So it allows you to see all that, allows you to stay on top of it. And so if you can go on to the next screen, this is what you'll see on that app app page, just scroll down until you find it. You can click on the button, get that downloaded. It's free for you as an agent. There's never a cost to use our platform for you as an agent. I'm excited to give you this free tool. The buyer does pay a flat fee of $15, and that's for anything from $30 all the way up to $100,000. So that stays a flat fee. And then what they're going to see is an email from you. You're going to be locking in the details of this request, selecting your escrow holder, locking in the amount of that money, and they're going to get a digital email. It's going to have a secure link in it. We're going to have a full 256-bit encryption. So banking level encryption all along the way for the safety of your buyer. And here's the best part. Your buyer's information stays private. So Chad just mentioned wire fraud. Chad just mentioned checks and the realities of checks. Even with check usage going down, guys, check fraud has been on the rise. So any of these applications that take a picture of your check, hackers realize that if they capture that image, they still have everything they need. So our system doesn't use a check. It doesn't use a wire. It's using the ACH, which is the same thing that Venmo is using on a day-to-day basis, like you use when paying your friends. And we are able to set that up safe and secure and keep their sensitive information private. So they don't have to worry about sharing those details with anybody publicly. You don't have to worry about someone trying to type it in correctly. All of those details are kept off the table. And then as we are getting to that paid button, the majority of banks that are connected through our network, we're able to also check for sufficient funds before they even hit paid. So if you've had a bounce check recently to lock in that contract, you don't even have to worry about that as well. We're going to do that extra check there, making sure that up front they have the funds they need to make that payment. So we're going to do all these extra steps. And then the very last thing that happens when the buyer gets paid, absolutely everyone in the process is notified. So you guys don't have to make phone calls here and there. I used to be an office manager with a real estate company, and I remember how many directions that that receipt had to go and the confirmation of those monies being received. So automatically you get to include the lender, you get to include the opposite office, the listing agent, anybody who needs to be informed. That will be included in the request process as you're creating it. So go ahead and drop their email in. It's the very last step before actually sending it out. If you can go on to the next slide for me. I wanted to point out, we're available for use either through our phone app. You can actually access us through our website. In the top right corner, there's a sign-in button, or you can actually use us in KW Command. We're in the app marketplace, so you can go there, search out EARNNEST, and download us for free. And we're actually working on a full integration into Command. Because we are a strategic partner with you guys there at Keller Williams. We were founded by our Keller Williams agent back in 2017. So we're proud to partner with you as a digital tool to make your life a lot easier. But once you get to the request stage, this is what you're going to see for selecting an escrow holder. I wanted to point this out. It's a smart search. So these are some of the title companies that are already available in your area in Hawaii there. So if that is, those are some that you use, feel free to take advantage of that. But I also want to point out at the bottom there's an invite button. So if your preferred escrow holder is not in our network, you can always invite them. And we have a full team that's going to reach out for you and make sure that we can get them registered and on board so that you can make this a lot easier for your next contract. Then the final thing I wanted to mention is the next slide, if you would. We have a full-time support team available Monday through Friday, Eastern Standard Time. So we are on the opposite side of the world in some ways, but it does cover the majority of our hours still. If you ever need them, please don't hesitate to reach out. And then my email is Aaron, AARON, @earnest.com. Feel free to reach out to me as well, and I can help you out with any details you have. So any questions, feel free to email me, feel free to reach out to our support, but the average agent is spending 90 seconds or less creating a request. And the average buyer is actually spending 5 minutes or less. So imagine cutting down that hour-long process, the 2-hour-long process, and getting it down to 10 minutes or less. Hopefully that's exciting for you. And if you guys ever need anything, feel free to let me know. Chad, any questions that you have for me?
No, I don't, but thank you so much for popping. And I thought it was a great segue And we are KW as a whole is partnering with Earnest, but we don't have ownership in them at all. It's nothing like that at all. It doesn't cost you as an agent anything, but it does speak to the consistency of us being a leader and a forerunner in technology, and as well as safety and security. So it's a great and awesome tool to kind of lead the pack. And quite honestly, it blends well with everything that we're already doing with regards to it being in that tech space. So if you guys have any questions for Aaron, let me know. I'll give you his personal contact information. If you want to come off of mute, if anyone has a question now, you're welcome to do so as well. If not, then Aaron, thank you so much for joining us. We'll have you back. We'll keep having him come in just to chat, give us updates and that sort of thing. But how great is it if you can just have especially guys who deal with military, and instead of having them go to Navy Fed or USAA, and it's a whole rigmarole and getting someone on the phone and doing a wire transfer and this kind of thing. This is less expensive and certainly much, much easier for your client. So I'm sure that they would appreciate it as well. Aaron, thank you so much for popping in. I appreciate it. We'll talk to you soon. Take care now.
Have a great day.
So going on to our announcements, we have a bunch of newcomers, people that have just joined KW. So welcome them when you see them around. Congratulations to our top producers. Great job, guys. Thank you so much for all your efforts and your hard work. Some updates, some of which we'll go over in further detail too. But so on listings, there's 4 documents that are required when you have a listing. It's a dual agency, it is a KW standard addendum. It's a First Hawaii Title ABA, and it was the COVID addendum as well. And that was just for the listings as a disclosure for the seller. Right as of right now, you no longer need the COVID addendum. So there's only 3 things that you're going to need in your listing packets. So you can drop the COVID addendum. You can still choose to use it and include it in offers if you're representing a buyer, if you want to. And again, that's entirely up to you. It's based on the circumstances. It does come up every now and again, but it's certainly not used as frequently in terms of issues that may arise in the transaction. So you can use it on the buy side if you want. You no longer have to include it on the list side. Also, what we're going to be discussing in the educational piece as we move on a little bit further is going to be something called designated agency. So you guys have all heard of dual agency, and we're just going to talk to what the specific rules are with the dual agency and what the rules will be for designated agency. It's a new thing. And I have a feeling that in most circumstances, the way that I'm seeing dual agency show up in our firm, I think that probably, and Mike, you can kind of correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's probably going to be 85 to even as high as 90% of all the dual agency that we're seeing right now is probably going to end up being designated agency anyways. So if that is in fact the case, then you guys absolutely need to make sure that you know the differences between the two and what you can and can't do for each. Another huge announcement is we have property management. Everyone has been asking for that, and we do have property management available. So Jody, who just joined us, she comes with years of experience in property management. She's part of our property management team. She came from a company managing 450 doors herself, which is an ungodly number, but she's very, very experienced. Here's what it means for you guys though, is, you guys, I'm sure that people have partnered up with different PMs in the past, and they may or may not take care of your client. They may or may not, more than likely not, pay you a referral fee. And at the end of the day, because I've experienced this myself too, is, 2 years later, 3 years later, you find out that your client bought with them and they never even gave you the courtesy of giving that client back to you. So some of the things that we're doing to change that is you get paid a referral fee. So the moment that you refer an owner who needs a property manager, you'll be paid a referral fee on referring that owner or an investor into that property management pool. You get the client back. That client will always be taken care of for you. And then we'll market to the client from you. So we'll put a smart plan together with your face and name on it. So it's kind of added branding that they'll receive basically from you, but we're taking care of all that for you. And yeah, so we'll, now we have property management. If anyone needs or has the need of any kind for property managers, or you have a client that is an investor that needs property management, please send them our way. You'll be taken care of. You'll get a referral fee and all that, and we'll keep building that out as we go. So great updates. I just came from, along with Christy and Ray and Colette, we came from Mega Leadership Camp, which you guys have all heard of Mega Camp. Mega Leadership Camp was the first of its kind. It was really, really good. It was only operating principals, team leaders, market center administrators, and in a room with Gary Keller, Marc King, and Jason Abrams. And it was just 3 days of masterminding. And so I put a couple of things on there. I just wanted to share a couple of tidbits, insights, and I'll share my notes to some of you as well, because there's so many. It's like one of those things where I can talk about it for an hour, and you're not going to get the gist of it if you weren't actually there. So certainly I'm doing it a disservice by talking about it for 3 minutes. But one of the things that I thought was kind of impactful that Gary had mentioned was school is never out for professionals. I thought that resonated because he mentioned, in your life, you can only master 5 or 6 things. You can only you can reach mastery of 5 or 6 things in your life, whether it's being a linguist and speaking different languages, or whether it's, a hobby in carpentry, if you like to use your hands, or maybe it's music and playing and writing music or playing a certain instrument, or in our case, it's something that we're passionate about is real estate or business. And he said a lot of people, they get to goodery, but not mastery. And, they do what they need to do to kind of get along or to make a certain income. But mastery is when things just start to come easy. And the other benefit in mastery, which I thought was great, is, we all talk about making calls and lead generation. And one of the things he said was when he was a real estate agent, he did not like or enjoy making cold calls. So he went out and sought to ensure that he reached a certain level of mastery, because he became a magnet for not only clients, but other agents looking to him as a source of information. And so that term that he used was being more attractive, and not in the physical sense, but attracting, because you're the source of information. You offer so much value and expertise and mastery. So he said 6 Keys to Abundance is a book that he read that changed his life, and he highly recommended it. And the hack to being disciplined is being habitual. So, a lot of people lack that discipline and doing that thing that they do consistently to ensure they hit and reach success, but it really becomes that forming of that habit is just being habit based to be disciplined. And then the other thing I'd mention here too is 39% better chance of accomplishing your goals when you write them down. And we talk about that all the time. Whenever we talk about a class or have a mastermind, or in this case, a team meeting with our educational component in it, make sure you take notes, because you may have heard me say certain things a few times before, especially if it's technical. But if you're not writing it down, you're not implementing things, or it's something that you know of, but you didn't put into practice and take action around, you're more likely to reach that goal if you just write it down. So all good stuff. Mega Camp, there's a slide coming up, but Mega Camp is also coming up too as the next conference to go to. You guys all might have your people that you use for mortgages. Don't disregard Keller Mortgage. They're a national company. It's the sister company of Keller Williams. They are very, very low margin in how they're structured, but they do have some awesome technology and awesome components. So at least consider them if you don't have a lender that you're tied to, or maybe tossing it around. What I would often do is introduce 2 lenders to all clients, my local lender, and in this case, a Keller Mortgage. One of their value propositions is they don't charge an appraisal fee if something doesn't close. So as the market shifts, that could be a great thing to have in your toolbox, to be able to have a mortgage company that doesn't take any upfront fees for the cost of the appraisal, or doesn't bill the client the appraisal cost at all. So they only pay if it closes. So in other words, if you have 3 escrows that all fall out because the appraised value didn't come in, and thus the buyer ended up canceling, the buyer doesn't owe anything at all. They only owe on the one that actually ends up closing. So it's a good value proposition. You're also kept in the loop. They email you and text you as the agent. Mr. Smith filled out the pre-approval. Mr. Smith went into processing. Mr. Smith went into underwriting. The appraisal's back, and they kind of keep you in the loop on all things too. So something to consider. Family reunion, if you guys did attend physically or even virtually, the library is coming to a close in terms of the videos that are on there. It's going to be good until April 25th. So if there's videos on there or segments or panels that you want to make sure that you watch, please do so before April 25th. I also keep a copy of everything too. So if it's after that date and you guys need something, just let me know. This month is Fair Housing Month. This is from the KWRI and our region. So there's all kinds of different classes that are, some are in person, some via Zoom. Ask me if you want to attend any of these and I'll point you in the right direction. And there's a new certification, Agents of Distinction. And so here's Mega Camp. Mega Camp this year is going to be 23rd and 24th. I believe it's going to be in Austin. I highly recommend going this. So Mega Camp, if no one has ever been, it's not as large in attendance as Family Reunion, but it's super powerful. So a lot of panels and a lot of classes from agents that are really successful at what they're doing. So I'm sure that there's going to be some sort of virtual component to it, as it seems the market of the future will always have that in person and then the virtual component. This is likely going to be the same, but there's nothing like being in the energy in the room as well. So if you're interested in that, we'll probably have a bunch of specials on that. Another bit of news too, we are having Bold again, and Bold is going to be taking place. I believe it's the last week of May is when it's starting, and Bold will be in person. So it'll be in person. It's not going to be on Zoom. Now, with that being said, the caveat to that is our Kauai agents, like I know Tim's on, I think Catherine might be on too, Koa's on. Our Kauai agents can dial in via Zoom. Of course, you can also join us in person here, but it'll be physically on Oahu in our training room here. So, and there's mixed reviews on the last Bold session. So I basically called them and I said, I need to have a really, really good coach. So I got the director of Bold to come do it. So it's the actual director of Bold who runs the entire program, him and a couple of other coaches, one of which is Molly. I don't know if you guys know Molly, but she's also the dean of KW School of Real Estate. So we got some like major heavy hitters for Bold coaches that are flying in physically to our market center to teach Bold. So I hope that you guys can attend. We want to make sure that we get a lot of people engaged in that. Super excited about that. We'll send some stuff out. KW segments. So there are a bunch of different segments or communities is what KW is calling them. If you want to specialize in different things, please let me know and I'll point you in the right direction. But there's a new home segment, a YP, which is young professionals. Thankful to Daniel Ulu for putting that together. There's a lot of YP members on the call today. So that's been fantastic. Luxury. So if you're already luxury, I know Catherine is in it, Taniguchi's, Ihara's. There's a bunch of luxury agents. Jerry's on luxury. Tons of luxury agents already. But if you're looking to get into luxury and break into luxury or find out what the benefits are, that's a great class to attend. If you want to get into commercial, we have that as well. KW Land. There's also KW Military. So there's a lot of different communities and segments that you can get involved with because maybe you're passionate about it, but also that could open up another opportunity for business. So if you are military, if you're a veteran, if you're a military spouse, KW Military might be something to consider joining as well. So a lot of good stuff there. I just put a screenshot. I think people forget, they always look at the local level classes and education, which is great. But don't forget, guys, we're an education and training company. And there's so many things on Connect. And in terms of live classes, which this is just a screenshot of April's live schedule for the back half of April. And look at all the awesome classes that are there already. It doesn't cost you anything at all. It's all free. You can dial in directly through Connect. And then they also have a video library of all things that have been recorded in the past. So, think of KW Connect. Command is what we use as our CRM platform, and Connect is what we use almost like a education, our Netflix of education and training. So make sure that you lean into that. I talk to a lot of agents that will say, hey, there's not enough classes for this topic or that topic. I promise you, if you look on Connect, it's probably already there. For a class that's coming up that's free, or a recording that's already there that's free too. So make sure that you do engage and lean into this. Outfront is a digital and a physical magazine, and you should absolutely log on to that. I think that you guys will absolutely value some of the content and stories that they have. Some of it can be shared, some of it is educational that you can use and apply in your business already. Every single month, KW provides social media content. And so they have a social content calendar, which they provide design updates that are already done. So you guys don't have to recreate the wheel whatsoever. So anything that you want to put out there, whether it's Easter stuff, which already passed, whether it's, Fair Housing Month in this particular case, you can grab already designed stuff and then brand it to yourself by adding your name, our market center information, your photo, your contact information. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. It'll already be on there. More design updates, as you can see here. So all of that stuff is really great to be up to date with social media. We also have an agent branded magazine. So you can basically, for an item of value, you can have printed and paid for a magazine that's already done and it's just branded to you. That's something that definitely that I would have absolutely have done myself, which is great. So you can send to your database an actual magazine that's completely branded to you, that's professionally designed. So take a look at it. It should be coming out later this month. And then lastly, before we get into the education component of it, don't forget, guys, the TCPA is super, super important for those who are making calls and lead generating, and hopefully that's every single person. Make sure that you follow these rules. It's really, really important. We haven't been hit hard with that in Hawaii, but there are market centers, there are states and areas on the mainland that there's multi-million-dollar lawsuits that are taking place as a result of a violation of the TCPA. So if you have questions about the TCPA and how it applies and how to avoid getting penalized, feel free to ask me, ask Mike. Mike, of course, as many of you know already, is our managing broker. And I'm happy to help dissect this a little bit further as to what best practices you should or shouldn't be doing as a result to stay compliant in TCPA. So before we get into the topic, which is other firms' addenda, other brokerages' addenda, real quick, we want to discuss dual agency versus designated agency. I don't know if anyone has heard of designated agency, but that is something that just recently came out. It was a kind of a topic of conversation for a couple of years. They didn't really do anything with it or move on it. And then suddenly out of nowhere, it just appeared without kind of an announcement of how they're going to deal with it. Mike and I had been talking in detail and at length about how to navigate through this. And it just is what it is. But our purchase contract doesn't necessarily line up properly with what the intention is for this particular new agency that's created and the document. And so we have to deal with what we have to deal with. And so here's what the document looks like. And before I get into how we're the process of using designated agency or dual agency, we just want to better understand what dual agency is, because I have a feeling that not all people realize what it is, what's involved. A lot of agents, especially the newer agents, think that a dual agency just simply means that you're representing both the buyer and the seller in the same transaction. While yes, that is dual agency, it also means when the brokerage firm represents both the buyer and seller as well. And there's some nuances to it and what you can and cannot do. Like dual agency absolutely provides a conflict of interest where it kind of handcuffs the agent, you yourself, if you're representing both the buyer and seller, even at the brokerage level. So in other words, if I represent the buyer at Keller Williams and Mike represents the seller at Keller Williams, that's a dual agency relationship. His seller, whom I've never even met before, and my buyer, who Mike has never met before, are still clients, not customers of each of us. And we still owe fiduciary responsibility to both. And it handcuffs us in terms of how we can help each negotiate for their goals and to better and best serve their interests. It can be a potential issue and a potential problem. So what is a dual agency? This is all coming from this document, this form. I just want to touch on it. A dual agency arises when a brokerage firm represents multiple clients with competing interests. This is not uncommon when a firm has a large number of clients and is involved in a high volume of transactions, which is definitely us. Dual agency most frequently arises when a brokerage firm represents both the buyer and seller in the same transaction. It can also arise, however, when a brokerage firm represents multiple buyers who are interested in the same property, or multiple sellers of similar properties competing for the same buyers. That last sentence is tricky. That opens up a whole area of potential dual agency. When a dual agency situation becomes known, there is an immediate conflict of interest that needs to be addressed, since under Hawaii law, all of the brokerage firm's licensees are regarded as acting as agents for all of the parties represented by the brokerage firm, is what I alluded to earlier. One option to address the conflict is for all the parties to enter into a dual agency relationship. So how does a dual agency relationship work? If the parties agree to be represented in a dual agency client relationship, all of the brokerage firm's licensees then become dual agents simultaneously representing all parties to the transaction. Dual agents are required to remain neutral in all negotiations and must not advance the interest of one party over the other. While they can work with the clients to facilitate a successful completion of the transaction, there are limitations on the services they can actually provide. For example, dual agents are not allowed to recommend an offering price for a property, nor how to respond to an offer received. Recommending negotiating strategies are similarly not permitted. So that's a tricky one. I would hope that everyone is not doing that now, but it's tricky because if you're dealing with a dual agency, and like I mentioned before, that example of, you being the one agent and representing both the buyer and representing both the seller is a little bit more, it's a little easier to navigate in terms of, I can't give you information on how to best negotiate and kind of remaining neutral because both parties. The one that comes up, I think that people step on each other's toes, and it's very easy to do so inadvertently, is when the brokerage firm, so that example that I represent the buyer and Mike represents the seller. That would be a tricky one because I don't know who the seller is. I don't have a relationship with him whatsoever, but that buyer is coming to me and saying, hey, so listen, what should I offer? What do you think? What's your opinion? It's hard for us to say, well, I really can't give you an opinion, because that's why they hired us to begin with. So it becomes very, very tricky. There's ways around it. The ways before designated agency came about, the way around it would be to have a discussion with what the comps are. You can show them and say, this is what's selling in the area. What do you think? What do you feel most comfortable with? Here's what you're approved for. What do you think? That you can kind of put it back on them and have that kind of conversation, but it becomes tricky if they want your opinion and you're handcuffed on providing them one based on how this reads on traditional dual agency. So what is designated agency? This is the new thing. Designated agency is another form of a client-agent relationship that may be used to address the conflicts of interest that arise from dual agency situations. If all of the parties agree to be represented in a designated agency relationship, then the brokerage firm may proceed to designate one or more of the brokerage firm's licensees to work exclusively for each of the clients. The licensee that have been so designated are not required to remain neutral and may advocate for and advise the client they have been designated to work with. The brokerage firm shall remain neutral as to all parties represented by the brokerage firm. So the key component there is, especially for those who work on teams, for instance, you can now have a different licensee representing the seller than that of the buyer. And you do not need to remain neutral any longer. You still have to be professional. There's still confidentiality and honesty and all these fair dealings and things like that. That of course should always apply regardless. But now you can better answer the question, what should I offer? And you can now properly answer that question without feeling as though you're being handcuffed. Services that a designated agent can provide. As a designated agent, the licensee can offer a full array of services, including but not limited to providing information about comparable properties and assist the client in making informed decisions as to what price to offer or accept. Suggest strategies to obtain the client's desired results in negotiations. Disclose all material facts known to the brokerage and or its licensees about the property. Make recommendations for obtaining the services of experts, legal surveys, inspections, etc., and advise on how to respond when the resulting reports are received. Explain real estate forms, terms, and procedures. Prepare contracts and associated documents. Assist the client in comparing financial alternatives. And lastly, explain closing costs and procedures. those are not things that you would otherwise be able to freely and loosely do in a traditional dual agency relationship. So huge difference. I mean, it really is a big difference in terms of what you can and cannot do. And so, by the way, Mike, before I move on, is there anything that I missed that I should cover that's important?
I mean, some people might not completely understand when you would use either. Really, in my mind, we should be using designated agency every time it's a Keller Williams listing, if it's our buyer. And the only time you wouldn't is if you represent both parties yourself, and I think you might have alluded to that. You might be getting to that in a moment, but we should always default to designated. And I think you're going to get into now how we can do that mechanically, because the policy is a little bit ahead of the forms, and hopefully that can change in the near future. But for now, this is what we've kind of think is the best way to navigate.
Yeah, well said. And the dual agency will still apply, guys, if and I'm gonna, because let's see, I'm gonna look at my screen. Amanda is on my screen. So Amanda, if Amanda represents the seller and she also represents the buyer, that is not in any way, shape, or form a designated agency. It could not be. You're still going to be a dual agent, and those restrictions and conflicts of interest still apply in that scenario as a single agent representing both the buyer and seller in that regard. If, however, the firm represents, meaning that it's a different agent, so Amanda represents the seller and I represent the buyer, then we can absolutely and should not use dual agency. We absolutely should use a designated agency, because then we can provide additional and better service without that conflict in that case. So there's a way to do it. And as Mike had mentioned, the purchase contract is not currently constructed in such a way to mechanically in kind of put into the designated agency as it should be. So in A2, as you guys are already familiar, there is one section, which is A2C, which is dual agency. So what we're going to do is, if you're going to be using a designated agency, what you have to put on there is how we have it illustrated, which is Keller. So first of all, A2A and A2B would be NA, because the seller is not represented solely by one brokerage as we would typically write with another brokerage involved. You would check C, which is dual agency, and we would say Keller Williams Honolulu by way of designated agency. We have to make reference to the designated agency, so that we're basically changing the term, which is, yes, the dual agency is the only place to put that, because that's the agency section, but it's going to be by way of designated agency. And then on section D1, which I kind of put a screenshot in there too, is obviously I made point to NA dual agency, because it's not a dual agency in this circumstance. And we're going to check other, and we're going to check the designated agency disclosure agreement, which is that form that is available right now as we speak in zip forms. That's the HBR form. But we've also gone to the extent of creating another document, which is our KWH agency disclosure form, which is to further amend the purchase contract so that we understand that it's a designated agency and not a dual agency.
Just to quickly jump in for you, Chad,
Sure.
in May, there's going to be a new version of the purchase contract that's getting released by HBR. And under D1, they're going to have a box that you can actually check for designated agency, which is great, because then you don't have to put it under other. You will not use as you can see here, it'll be NA for dual agency, and there will be one for designated. And the reason we've gone to the other step of adding the KWH agency disclosure addendum is because it doesn't really paint an accurate picture how it is. As Chad said, under A2A, the words "and all licensees" means you're not representing just the seller, everyone is. Same thing with the buyer, because the HBR thought that either A or B would be the correct way, but it's incorrect mechanically, because it puts all of the licensees at, to represent that particular party, which defeats the whole purpose. So the way that, until they have a box that is marked, like a section D under A2 that says designated agency, our office leadership thought that it would be better to have the client physically have a spot to check, I want designated agency. instead of just this workaround. So it might seem a little bit redundant on its surface, but it's because our forms and our policy is ahead of the marketplace right now. I expect that it'll eventually catch up, but the way to do it would be for now on the purchase contract to mark C by way of designated. For right now, do it how Chad has it here under D1. And then once they release the next version of the form next month, we can actually mark under D1 designated agency disclosure and agreement. And then additionally, we've developed our own form that is an agency disclosure addendum, which it's this form here, where the client will actually have a spot where they can mark under paragraph D under A1, where it's a physical, okay, now they're agreeing to this. And it goes through and explains the minutia behind each of those terms. So again, it seems a little bit convoluted at the moment, but eventually, hopefully the forms will catch up to the policy. But for now, this is the best way to reduce your risk and protect you from effectively committing malpractice, which a lot of us have done without even knowing that we did under the previous dual agency rules.
Thank you for that. So yeah, so I think that the creation of the designated agency is really, really good. I think that helps all of you guys practice a little bit more freely, but to Mike's point, we have to button up and use the right forms and the right process to ensure that you're protected, because while they created the right type of this new agency, if the paperwork doesn't support what we're doing, then the whole thing can fall apart. So it's not, rocket science. I'm going to back up real quick, just making sure that everyone knows. So if you are representing either the seller or the buyer, and someone within our brokerage, whether it's a team or in our brokerage, is also representing the other party, you're going to want to use a designated agency. And in order to put that in practice on the contract, this is how you're going to do it. You're going to check A2C, Keller Williams by way of designated agency. In D1, you're going to put those two forms in there. The designated agency disclosure and agreement is an HBR form. It's already in zip forms. The other one, which is the KWH agency disclosure addenda, which is here, that's going to be, I think it's already added to the intranet, but that can be found on the intranet. And so we'll make that readily available as well. So if you're entering into a designated agency, that's how we're going to structure it. Does anyone have any questions before I move on to the other topic? That always scares me when there's no questions.
And I'm not sure it's on the intranet yet. There was some internal, we're trying to make it a fillable form, and I'm not sure if we have it quite live yet, but if you need that form, reach out to myself or Chad. We can get it for you. And it will be live on the intranet soon, and potentially down the line on zip forms as well, because it's going to be a real common thing. But this is probably the form that's going to be your best friend once you get to know it a little bit better.
I have a feeling the next iteration of the, yeah.
So on the templates, are you going to default to this and we just take it off, or are we just going to add on?
That's a great question. That's a great point. I didn't even think about it. To be honest with you, I probably will default to it, because I think that we're going to be doing more of this than regular dual agency. So if you are doing a dual agency, again, the dual agency, Tim, would be you represent the buyer as well as you represent the seller. Then you'll just have to know to go in there and take off the by way of designated agency portion of it. In fact, I can title it. I can create a template and title it designated agency, and have that completed in such a way too, and then add those forms and documents into zip forms for you.
Perfect.
Yeah, great point. I'll make Jewel, can you remind me to do that after the class, and I'll set up that template for you guys. Thanks for that suggestion, Tim. Wonderful suggestion. Any other questions or comments? Nope. Okay. Pretty easy, but I think it's all good stuff. So the topic that we're going to be discussing today, which we've talked about once before, it's been about 6 months or so, which is other firms' addenda. So whoever our cooperative brokerage is that we're partnering up with, and we typically see this, we're typically held to use their forms when we're on the buy side, right? It's a seller's market. In order for offer to be considered or accepted. It usually says on the MLS, please submit pre-approval letter, bank statements, whatever it is that they're asking for, along with Coldwell Banker Standard Addendum or Better Homes and Garden Standard Addendum or whatever it might be. So we're going to go over some of the ones that we see often that are the most egregious. And I don't mean it maliciously. I mean egregious in terms of amending or altering contingencies or the buyer's rights within the contract. And so some of you might be, pretty experienced in real estate. You've done a handful of transactions, and you might be conditioned to know these are the contingencies that the buyer has that they're protected within. And it lasts for this J1 lasts for this amount of time. And I have an M1 for this amount of time, and whatever that might be. What you don't realize if you don't read is if you have another firm's addenda that's inserted and made part of that contract, some of those rights or contingencies may be altered, which changes your negotiation and strategy. And so that's really the point of this, is to ensure that we're reading and we understand the other side. So we're going to look at a couple of them. It shouldn't take too long at all. First one is locations. By the way, as far as I'm aware, locations, Coldwell and Better Homes have different versions of their addenda. They have a buyer side addenda and a seller side addenda. And depending on which side we're on is the one that is most impactful. Meaning if they're representing the seller, that's where typically these ones that come up that are a little bit more egregious or altering of the contract. So where does locations alter the contract? If you read in their section number 2, in the termite provision, L2 of the purchase contract and L3 are amended as follows. Seller acknowledges seller has disclosed what seller knows about the termite infestation and damage onto the property. And under paragraph L2, seller is required to provide termite report to buyer. Buyer understands that buyer should review the TIR, and buyer understands that any form of termite infestation has probably resulted in damage. The seller and brokerage firm may not be aware of the damage that this damage may be latent and undiscoverable without aggressive inspection methods. And it goes on. The buyer's rights to cancel the contract based on TIR are as follows. If the TIR contains no visible evidence of termite infestation or damage caused by termites, buyer may not cancel the purchase contract. So again, is it a huge red flag? No, but we have to know these things. And I will say, it's when you see these kind of things, it doesn't mean to tell the sky isn't falling. It doesn't mean to tell the buyer, hey, let's not write an offer. Our goal is to educate, to warn, and wait for instruction. So if you see an addendum like this that needs to be, or is suggested by the listing agent to be included in the offer submission, read it, understand it, and then explain it to educate and warn, explain it and educate the buyer. Mr. Buyer, just so you know, they've asked us to submit their standard addendum, but it alters the purchase contract in the following way. Let me read it to you. And then you read it out to them. So you've educated them, you've warned them that this is something that would change or amend your rights to some extent in the purchase contract. Let me know how you'd like to proceed. So we've educated them, we've warned them, and we're waiting for instruction. And then document that you've had that conversation with them. And if they say, yeah, no problem at all, proceed forward, that's totally fine. You can absolutely use that. What we don't want to have happen is, and I've seen this happen sadly too often, which is, oh my God, I didn't know that changed everything, because we're acting as though this thing didn't exist. And we're used to whatever is built in boilerplate to the purchase contract. B continues, if the TIR indicates visible evidence of infestation and or damage caused by termites, the buyer has 5 days upon receipt of the TIR to review and accept the property or cancel the purchase contract pursuant to paragraph 03. It goes on, C, if in the event there is visible evidence of infestation, seller is required under paragraph L2 to order and pay for the recommended treatment for that condition. Once seller completes the recommended treatment and or provides the disclosure of termite damage required under paragraphs L3 and I2, the buyer accepts the property as is. With respect to the discovered termite infestation and or termite damage, buyer may not later cancel the purchase contract due to that same condition. D continues, add to termite provision L3. Buyer is aware that the TIR may fail to address termite damage if buyer is concerned that termite damage may affect the structural integrity of the improvements. Buyer is advised to have experts of buyer's choice assess the damage and so on and so forth. The real thing is when anything changes how they can cancel, if they can cancel, or I-2, which is the amended seller disclosure. You just have to be aware of those things. So it's not red flags as in don't proceed, but it's stuff that you should just pause. Section 4, paragraph 4 of their addendum. Seller's obligations upon later discovered information. So this is affecting I-2. In accordance with provision HRS 508D9, all written reports obtained by or provided to buyer shall be considered an amended disclosure, seller disclosure statement, and the discovery date shall be the date buyer receives the written later discovered information. Reports include, but are not limited to, title reports, inspection reports, survey reports, et cetera, et cetera. So this one is one that I don't know why this one irritates me more than anything, because I see this pop up on a couple of different brokerages sections, and I don't believe, and I'm not an attorney, but I don't believe that this is even legal, but it hasn't been tested, and we don't want to be part of that test anyways, which is, if you read the law 508D, which is the requirement that a seller has to disclose, what they're saying, what this document is saying is the seller doesn't have to disclose. Just assume that the report, whether it's J1, your inspection report that the buyer paid for, or anything else, just assume that that's an amended disclosure. We'll just call that an amended disclosure. Well, the problem with that is the seller didn't disclose anything at all. The seller may not even know about that. But the way that this is written is that, hey, just count that as an amended disclosure. So I don't believe that would hold up. Not an attorney, but the point is that you should understand that this is the language that a couple of the firms are using, and we should still educate and warn the clients, and then of course wait for their instructions if they want to proceed with that. And then I go on to.
I had a quick question.
Yeah.
On that though, wouldn't it fall under later discovered information that the buyer discovers? And if the seller does not update the seller's property disclosure statement, then there's a predetermined time at which the buyer can cancel without having it amended?
Yeah, there's in the in section I, there is I think it's I3,
I3,
and then the action is I4.
Yeah.
That so there's components to where the seller needs to amend it, but the buyer still maintains that right in locations. There are some that alter both. So the point is, you got to still read it. And the reason why I include this, Russ, too, is it says on there in bold and all caps, must be completed by seller only. And so my whole point is, we don't want to be the test for a lawsuit. Obviously, we don't even want to get into that. But just make sure that you read it, because if it amends something, it's just best to understand how it impacts and how it can affect your negotiation and strategy. So thanks for bringing that up too.
Quick interjection, if I may. Probably the most common comment that I make in my reviews is regarding this section when there's conflicting dates. So if I3C and I4B have conflicting dates, like one has 10, one has 14, then that creates confusion over which paragraph really applies. So if you're one of my review team people, you've probably seen that comment from me. And just for people that aren't, it's a good practice, whether it's 10 or 7 or 15, to make those the same dates. So that way there's not, one says this, one says that, which one really applies in this instance. Just be consistent, and then you won't have to hear from me when I say those things.
I think he's referring to I3C
and I4B.
I4B. Yeah. Just so you know, so to have some consistency, the language sounds the same, so you guys can read it. But one is driven by the buyer and one is driven by the seller. So moving on, here's Sotheby's. Same thing. I'm not going to bore you with some of the language, but same thing where it's an automatic amendment to the disclosure statement. So it's basically saying whether it's G1, J1, K2, which is survey, L2, which is termite, M1, which is condo, N2, which is rental. The fact that I even know that memorized is really scary. I think I look at too many contracts. All those things are basically stating that if you know about them, then consider it an amended disclosure statement. Termite, it goes on, termite provision says basically similar to the other, which is amends the buyer's rights. If at no fault to the seller, this purchase contract does not close, the buyer hereby instructs escrow to pay for the cost of TIR. So in other words, if the buyer cancels and the seller has already done TIR, the buyer owes the cost of TIR. So it could be $500 or $600. And the tricky thing is, if at no fault to the seller is while that sounds detailed and specific, it's really not, because I can see this come up as a conflict. What if the buyer cancels within the rights of them doing so, but it's contested by the seller? You might have a fee of $500 or $600 that might be in dispute. So just
Chad?
again, something to know. Yes.
This is Vardit. I have a question. So I know that in this case, sometimes the seller will willing to not having the buyer paying for it because they continue with the sale, and the next buyer will. I mean, I had it in one transaction, so I know that we waived the TIR because the agent seller said, okay, we're going to put it in the market anyway. So for the new buyer, you know what I mean?
You're reusing a previous TIR. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. So just like a survey and a TIR, you can reuse an inspection. You just have to realize that it's an inspection, whether it's I'll tell you this too. This is a fun fact: is an appraisal, a home inspection, a TIR, which is a termite inspection, and a survey expire the date that it's dated on those reports. It's expired. So the answer is, could you use it? Sure, you can use it, but you have to realize that there's got to be some wiggle room there. So if an appraisal expires the date of the appraisal, how can a lender use it if it was done 45 days ago? Because the lenders realize that there's a little bit of gap, right? You can't close on a property the day of the appraisal. The appraisal is needed to underwrite and close the loan. So they realize they give a little bit of grace, and typically there's a time period of like 90 days that an appraisal can be used. Just like a TIR, termites are super, super aggressive. So could you as a buyer accept an existing TIR that they've done like 6 months ago or 9 months ago? You could, but you probably want to put some caveat into that. And again, remember we talked about educate, warn, and wait for instruction. The conversation that I might have with my buyer is, hey, Mr. Buyer, there's a lot of offers on this property. I've spoken to the listing agent and they already have 5 in hand and they're going to be reviewing tomorrow. So to strengthen the offer, you mentioned to me that you wouldn't mind waiving the brand new termite inspection report, and we'll accept the one that they already have. We can do that. I can write that and structure that in section Q of the purchase contract. But before I do, I just want to warn you that if the termite inspection report is 9 months old, it wouldn't tell us what happened from now backwards to 9 months. It would certainly help from the date that is on the termite inspection report, but termites are so aggressive, there could be some damage caused structurally or what have you that could impact that. Are you okay with that and taking on that risk? And if the seller says, yes, I'm fine with that, then we document that and we have the duty of instruction, but we got to warn them I don't want you guys to think as agents that it's okay to accept a survey, okay to accept termite that's old without having the conversation of what that risk looks like to a buyer, because that can really come back to bite someone later on. So if it's done within 30 days, probably fine. But the longer that termite inspection is, or the older that it is, with every 30 days, you add a lot more risk onto that as well.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
That's a great point, though. That comes up. When we're representing a buyer, sometimes our lens is, we're so competitive. It's win. How can I win at all costs? And thankfully this doesn't happen in Hawaii as much as it does on the mainland, but on the mainland, there are people that waive every single contingency, like inspection and documents. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you're just taking off all your ability to even cancel and look out for the best interest of the buyer. And then they wonder why agents are getting sued from homeowners once they close and they didn't, discover all these different things that are wrong with the property. So we really have to pause and understand that we're playing chess. Like there's certain things that you don't want to take off the chessboard. Association documents. Purchase contract M1 is amended by adding to the end thereof the following: notwithstanding the foregoing, if seller has attempted to obtain the documents from a property manager who has custody of such documents and such are not available from the property manager, seller shall not be required to provide it to the buyer. So in relation to condo docs, if it's not available, basically what it's saying is the seller doesn't have to provide it. It continues, purchase contract paragraph M3 is amended by adding the following. Seller is not required to provide any additions, supplements, modifications, and amendments to the documents in paragraph M3 that are issued during the escrow period. Buyer may choose to obtain these items at buyer's sole cost. This is, again, one of those little gray areas because it's not part of the purchase contract, it's amending it. And I don't think that it's detailed enough to really protect someone. And what I mean by that is, what if in escrow, the seller gets notification that there's a huge assessment or that HOA is going to increase? Well, should they be updating that on section I2, which is the amended? They should, but this is not in reference to that. It's saying that they don't even have to provide that information at all while it's in escrow.
That's almost failure to disclose though, Chad.
No, I realize that. That's what I'm saying, that some of these things can be a little bit tricky because it's in the face of something else that's required. And I hate it, but what can we do? And what we can do is know that it exists and you can shore that up. So when the right way to negotiate, and why I always say, we like to, in how we structure our contracts, we play chess, other companies play checkers. We know that this already exists. So if we know this exists and you're writing a contract to Sotheby's and you see this in here, you can shore that up by adding something in section Q to say that while in escrow, if something is, if they receive anything, a modification, supplement, addition, an amendment, what have you, it falls under the requirements of I2 and they must disclose that within a certain amount of time. So you can counter this or in fact, you can strike it. Go ahead, Russ.
Would we be able to have, so in your awesomeness and brilliance, would we be able to have, if there is a certain addendum from a respective company, whether it's Sotheby, CB Pacific, locations, wherever, would we be able to already have the templates from their standard addendum saying, if it's a Sotheby's addendum, then this language would be marked under Q1, which would be, in this case, that if there are additional information, supplements or modifications to the documents, that the seller will provide that on the seller's property disclosure statement.
Yeah, that's a good idea potentially. The one thing that let's chat about it because I think that's a potential good idea. The one downside that I see is then we're chasing all these different brokerages as to when they update. It's like, do we have the right? Are we even referencing the right paragraph number? Because now they've updated it and that's our last iteration of that thing. That's a great point though, because my goal is to make it as easy for you guys as possible, but I don't want you to overlook it. Like, we're not order takers, we're licensees and professionals. So the main point is make sure you guys are reading these documents because they're super impactful on how it can change your negotiation and escrow. But that's a great point, Russ. Well, let's talk about it afterwards.
Just a quick aside to that. Sorry to jump in again.
No, it's okay.
Sometimes those other agencies' addendums will say that this supersedes what's in the contract, or if there's conflicting terms. So if we're going to disclaim something like that in paragraph Q, we might want to say this verbiage is controlling in the event that anything is conflicting with it. So it puts that one back in the forefront and isn't trumped by the very document that we're trying to modify.
And that's the nuance that gets tricky because we don't know what each addenda states and how it's worded and what have you. So a blanket response is a little bit tricky. Obviously, the easiest thing to do is if you're reading the said disclosure of the cooperating brokerage, you can always strike. You can strike that paragraph out. There's things like that you can do. But lean into your BICs. That's exactly what we're here for. If you see something, you're like, hey, I'm dealing with help you sell, and it says this is another example. This automatic amendment to the disclosure statement. Which is pretty common, and they seem like they're taking language from each other and just kind of recycling it. And I don't like that. And I think it's impactful. How can I structure my purchase contract to ensure that my client is well protected? That's what we're here for, and we can help you with those things. So Help You Sell has the same thing. They also have a termite provision in their section. If the TR contains no visible evidence, then the buyer may not cancel the purchase contract, and it goes on with I2 as well, which is the amendment. Better Homes and Garden has one, which is automatic amendment to the disclosure statement as well. This one is one that I've seen with Better Homes. I think I've seen this at Coldwell too. So unilateral right to extend. So F3, as you guys know, in section F3, if you put 10 days, for instance, and you're on the buy side, the other party's on the list side, and you need to extend, even if it's for 1 day or 3 days, it's kind of best practice is just extend for 10 days, just so you have those dates, so you don't have to go back to the well. Because if you extend for 3 days using F3A, you've kind of burned that entire provision, right? So 10 days is in there. You use 3 days of the 10 days, the entire provision has been deemed used and it's done. If you then go, oh, you know what? I needed 10 days. I didn't need 3 days. How do you do that or adjust that? Then you got to go and actually get an amendment. And an amendment is bilateral, meaning both parties have to agree to it. It's not unilateral. You can't force that hand as you could here. So best practice, if you need to use F3A, just use the entire thing, unless you're positive and sure that you don't need to use it. What this states, though, is that if you use, in that same example, 10 days is in F3A, you use 3 days, then the other party has the ability to use the remaining portion of it. You no longer can use any other portion of the 3 days. You've used 3 days and 3 days are gone. You use your side of whatever you used. So what's left on the table in this example is 7 days. Now the seller has a right to use up to 7 days, the remaining portion. How this can be impactful and why this is important is I've had situations before where we represented one side or the other. And I'll give you an example. Let's say that we represented the buyer. The buyer is super time sensitive, right? Because a buyer typically, if they have financing, they're dealing with a lock and a lock extension, which could be really costly to a buyer. We've been in situations where the seller has indicated that they might extend, and it's for reasons that while they have the right to use this same provision, because it's unilateral, either side can use it, we didn't necessarily agree with the importance of it. And that, for instance, they might say, oh, the seller doesn't want to move that day, or they have like a golf tournament that they're going to go to, so they'd rather do it 3 days after that, or whatever it is. But those 3 days is going to jeopardize the cost and a lock extension for the buyer. So what we would do as a strategy is we could, if there's 10 days in F3, we would use 1 day, burn the entire provision. That eliminates the right of the seller to extend at all without using an amendment that's agreeable to both sides. You understand? So that's a tactic and a strategy. But what this paragraph does is it doesn't allow you necessarily to do that if this thing exists. So you just have to understand that if it exists, you need to either kill that entire, strike through that entire thing, or what have you, or use all of it so that they don't have any remaining time to use it. So just know that. Termites, it goes on. If a licensed pest control operator selected finds visible evidence of termite infestation, then treatment shall be ordered. Seller shall be responsible for up to, but not more than blank towards the cost of treatment. So the way that the purchase contract is now, there is no cap on that. They're just responsible for not delivering live termites. So the treatment is just whatever it is. It could be spot treatment or tenting, whatever is recommended, but without a cap. This provides a cap. So I've seen this come to us in different forms. And if it's an older home that's built in, the 50s or 40s or whatever it is, and it has a cap in there of $2,000 usually, especially if it's a bigger home or a larger home and an older home, probably wouldn't cover the most extensive type of treatment, which is what is tenting. It might only cover, 2/3 of that or half of that. So just be aware that that exists. Association subdivision documents, paragraph M1 of the purchase contract is amended as follows. By the way, anything that you read in someone else's addenda that says amendment or amending the contract, you should pause and read it a few times over just to ensure that you understand what it's amending. It amends as follows. The seller's responsibility to provide documents shall be limited to ordering the standard association subdivision document package from the providing property management company. If any of the documents itemized in paragraph M1 are not readily available at the time of seller's initial request, then the seller shall have no obligation to provide those documents thereafter. That's a big one as well. Because what if they don't have as an example, there's a document called RO105C, which is the lender's disclosure, which is really, really important. If it's not available at the time they requested it, then the seller's not responsible under no obligation to provide that document. So again, not the end of the world. Doesn't mean you shouldn't do business with locations or Better Homes or help you sell. It just means that you have to know what it is that you're kind of dealing with. Hawaii Pacific Realty. Time limit if appraisal is less than the purchase price. So in the event the appraised value is less than the purchase price, the buyer shall notify seller in writing within 72 hours of notification of the appraised value of his or her decision to either proceed with the consummation of the transaction or cancel this contract pursuant to termination provision 02 or 03 of the contract, thereby enabling the seller to remarket the property. If the buyer fails to respond within this time period, the seller has the option to declare this contract null and void. So basically, if the appraised value comes in less and you don't notify the seller with an appropriate amount of time, the seller can just cancel on the buyer. It has its own termite language that's in there too. Corcoran concessions. So this one is one that I've only seen so far at Corcoran is if checked, paragraph J1 is amended as follows. If buyer has submitted a repair and or credit request in writing to the seller within a time frame specified in J1 and seller has not responded in writing, the J1 timeframe shall be automatically extended by 5 days or until seller responds in writing if sooner. Buyer will have 3 days after receipt of seller's written response to accept the seller's response or terminate the purchase contract. So that can be amazing, like it can be great or it can be horrible depending on what side you're on. But if we function within the timeframes granted to us within J1, that's how we operate. J1 is 10 days. That means I should do the inspection within 2 or 3 days so that I receive it in 5 days. So I have time to think it over and figure out our next course of action and whether we're requesting credits or repairs or accepting it within 10 days. But what this says is it potentially adds a time frame after that if you request for repairs or credits to be had. So know that that exists as well. They have something similar with later discovered information, which impacts I2 and I4. Same thing as we kind of discussed with the other ones. Timeline. If checked, the contingency falls on a weekend or on a state or federal holiday, it shall be moved to the next business day. That's it. Guys, that was it. I flew through it on fast on purpose. So not to bore you to death with all this kind of legalese, but does anyone have any questions about either other firms' addenda, about designated agency, about EARNNEST, that other company that we're partnering with? Any questions whatsoever? No? Mike, it was so easy today.
I got one quick question.
Oh yeah, sure, of
On
course.
on the EARNNEST, so we just have to wait until that all the escrow companies join in order to utilize, or the ones that we're working with?
Yeah, and we're already working with First Hawaii Title to make sure that they join because we have a little bit more control with them. But I'm going to make that request to First Americans is already using them on the mainland, just not here. And yeah, we're doing our best to try to get as many of the largest escrow companies here to use it. It costs them nothing. It's super safe and secure. So I don't know why they wouldn't do it. They're already using it to a large degree on the mainland already.
And
Well,
how
there
long,
was an invite button. You just indicated that you can invite anyone if they're not already pre-populated. So like Chad says, as it becomes more common, you'll probably see it more often.
and in case I missed it, did he say how long they've been in business?
They've been in business, I think he said 2017. So not tremendously long, but certainly long enough to weather the storm of if it's going to be successful or not. The real thing that caught my eye when I was talking to them in person was I realized there's check fraud. I realized like taking the photo of the check that can be, or a physical check that can be lost. Or if you meet someone, a client, pick up a check, then you're dropping it at escrow, they're dropping it. There's a lot of, that's an old school kind of way of doing business. And then of course, wire transfer, I thought was pretty safe until I had a client once had a we wired money into escrow never received it. It went someplace else. And it blew my mind. I'm like, I thought wire transfer was like bank to bank. I thought that was super safe, but apparently that it is absolutely not. And so what they did is they've done over 120,000 transactions, all of which have gone through. There's not been a single case of fraud or missing funds of any kind. So, as technology moves further, wire transfer was probably a great ahead of its time thinking in technology a while ago, but it's definitely time for the next step, which is the Venmo of earnest money. The only downside that they have thus far is you can't. I mean, if you have a finance transaction, it's fine, but if it's an all cash transaction, they cap every transaction at 100,000. So if it's an all cash deal at $1 million, they, who's going to want to do this earnest money Venmo transfer type of thing 10 different times? So they're working on increasing that limit, but it's more than sufficient for earnest money. And probably if you have a finance transaction, it's more than sufficient to get the remaining funds in the escrow in 1 or 2 shots. And it's also cheaper and of course safer than doing a traditional wire transfer. And we're a tech company, so it's sexy and techy as well. So that's always nice. What other questions, comments, anything at all?
So what were the things required to submit with the listing contract?
Oh,
the listing
thank
agreement?
you. Sure. So one of the updates that we talked about today, Koa, and for anyone is we are no longer needing or requiring the COVID addendum to be part of one of the 4 documents for a listing packet. What is still required is the dual agency addendum, the KW standard addendum, and the first Hawaii title ABA. And let me just mention too, because people ask me all the time, we're not going to use first Hawaii title, so why do we need it in there? The reason why we need it in there is because we have ownership interest in first Hawaii title, so we have to disclose to the public that we have that interest, regardless if you use them or not. And same thing with the dual agency. Why do we have dual agency on the listing side when we don't even know if it's going to be a dual agency or not? Is we're disclosing that to the seller. So prior to even going to the market, we're educating the seller on what dual agency is, because if they have an issue or concern with it, we want to address that now, not when we enter into a dual agency, when we have an offer in hand. So, and then likewise with the ABA, you might say, well, I have a relationship with someone over at Old Republic who I'm going to do business with for the escrow, but you don't know that. The buyer determines that. What if you get an all cash offer that's over asking and they say, we want to use first Hawaii title? Now you're in a bind because you didn't disclose that we had ownership in first Hawaii title from the get-go. So those are the 3, it was 4, now it's 3 components of things that you need on the listing side. For listing, this is going to be in section A10 of the listing agreement. And on the buy side, you can still choose to include the COVID addendum, but it's not required. Thanks, Koa. Any other questions, Koa?
No, that's right.
Yeah, Alan.
Can you update your big review in sufficient format document with the new stuff? That's
yeah,
like
great.
my most used document.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah.
Jewel will remind me to do that today. Thank you, Alan, because I would have totally forgot about that.
Thanks.
Absolutely. Great suggestion. Anything else that I can answer for anyone, or any comments, suggestions, questions, anything at all?
I just wanted to say thank you to Chad Shimabukuro. You guys are always thinking ahead, so really appreciate that, and just wanted to say thank you for always providing us with some good topics to have conversations on and good knowledge. So thank you. It makes us better as agents.
Thanks, Russ. I appreciate it. I think I owe you $20 for every I told Russ, if every compliment you give me, I got to give you $20.
Starbucks, here we come. Just kidding.
All right, guys. Well, if there's no other questions, I greatly appreciate you taking the time. I know how busy everyone is. If you need anything afterwards, feel free to email or call me or Mike. We'll get you some of those documents sent out as well. We recorded this and we'll put it in the drive. We'll put it in Google Classroom as well. And I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Thanks so much, guys. Take care.
Thank you, Chad.
Bye now.
Thank you.